warm welcome to our presentation. My name is John and I will be your host. We are going to look at the topic letting go of the past, and I want to in particular look at why it is that so many people tend to hold on to the past, meaning holding on to the pain, the disappointment, the resentment, maybe the guilt, and also why it seems to be so challenging for some people to let go of the past, why they find it difficult to let go of something that tends to cause them pain. I'm going to be sharing quite a bit about my own personal journey of healing and recovery with regards to learning to let go of the past. So the presentation will be a mixture of therapeutic principles, if I can put it that way, and also, as I said, my personal experience. So let's get started. Carl Jung made the statement, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." And I remember the first time I saw the statement, I battled a bit to get my head around what he really meant by that. And when I started my own journey of healing and recovery, as I said, I started to learn that to a very large extent, my past had defined me. My past, in my personal understanding, had made me who I was. And one of the reasons being that it's part of human nature. When we go through difficult times, when we go through disappointments, when we go through painful experiences, and particularly at a younger age, we are inclined to internalize a level of responsibility for what happened, even if it may have been something completely outside of our control. We still are inclined to internalize there's something I have done, or there's something I should not have done, or there's something I could have done. And then from there, it may, in some cases, move on to, I deserved what happened, there's something wrong with me. And very often the various stories or the various narratives that we develop around what happened to us, as I said, may to a large extent define who we are. And from a psychological and even neurological point of view, once I identify with a label, or once I identify with a certain way of thinking about myself, it can be very difficult to dissociate from that, to see myself for who I am and being able to observe events, situations, and circumstances. So very often there seems to be a fusion between the two, and that we then identify or label ourselves based on what we experienced. And as I said, particularly at a younger age, although this can happen in adulthood as well, depending on the severity of the experience or the situation that we may go through. And as I said, once I've identified with that, it very much becomes part of who I am, and that will then start to have a direct impact and influence on my behavior, my attitude, and the way that I live my life in general. And Carl Jung basically said, if we can separate who we are from what happened to us, we are then able to define our own sense of identity by choosing who and what we choose to be, what we want to become. And of course, it is not as simple maybe as it sounds. There may be various processes that we may need to go through. There may be certain principles that we may need to learn to understand and implement, and that's basically what we are going to be looking at in this workshop. Also, a very important principle with regards to dealing with the past. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. Also, one of the sayings that had me baffled for a while until I started to really explore what it meant for me. And pain is inevitable, simply meaning in life we will go through painful experiences, as I said earlier on, disappointments, people letting us down, people hurting us, we letting ourselves down for that matter, unmet needs, dashed hopes. And that's part of life. There's not really much that we can do about that. So the pain pretty much is inevitable. However, suffering is optional. What is the difference between pain and suffering? Well, pain, as I said, could be the result of negative experiences where we experienced a negative emotion and we developed a whole scenario, a whole narrative around what happened. And then suffering would be the lingering, ongoing experiencing of the pain. And in addition to that, an ongoing sense of helplessness and hopelessness, and the feeling that there is nothing I can do about this, I'm stuck in this, whatever I try is not working, so that suffering continues to linger. Now, this statement says that suffering is optional, meaning I can find a way to put an end to the suffering. Although pain may be inevitable, it doesn't have to be an ongoing, lingering condition that I experience on a over a long period of time. But there is something that I can do to relieve the pain, which will then in turn contribute towards relieving the suffering. And again, we will look at some practical principles, how to go about that. There are really two sides to holding on to the past. There are two things that happen. These are the two main experiences. Should for whatever reason we find ourselves incapable of letting go of the past and letting go of the experiences, the memories and the pain. First of all, very often there are feelings of resentment, anger, bitterness, frustration aimed at others. It may be that others caused us emotional pain, others disappointed us, others let us down, others hurt us. So that resentment / unforgiveness towards others, the anger that we feel towards others, and that can be an ongoing experience for us, especially if we find ourselves holding on to the past. And then the other experience would be remorse, and that is directed at myself. When I feel guilty, I feel ashamed, I blame myself for something that has happened. In other words, I am holding on to unforgiveness towards myself. Resentment is basically unforgiveness towards others, and remorse could be unforgiveness towards myself. And there's a difference between taking personal responsibility and ownership and feeling remorse. I don't think we can necessarily avoid feeling remorse. However, ongoing feelings of remorse that can ultimately turn into bitterness and hatred and the inability to forgive ourselves are very, very counterproductive, as much as resentment is counterproductive. And the reason for that is the longer I hold on to resentment towards others, the longer I continue to blame them, what really happens as a result is I get to the place where I continue to experience something that may not be happening anymore. Somebody may have hurt me, somebody may have genuinely caused me harm, and that situation may have come to an end. That person might not even be in my life anymore, and yet our resentment, our holding on to it, our replaying the scenarios, our continuous revisiting of it, and as a result, continuing to experience the pain, causes us to continue to experience something that is no longer happening. Another situation that could result from resentment is that we give our power away and we put other people in charge of our emotions. So it could be every time I think about the person who hurt me, I re-experience the pain, or every time I see the person. So what it really boils down to is that that person, or it could be a situation for that matter, determines my emotional state and my emotional well-being. So what really happened is that I have given my power away to that person or that situation. A similar situation transpires from remorse, when we blame ourselves, when we hold on to maybe anger or unforgiveness towards ourselves. The same principle, we will also continue to experience something that may no longer be happening, and that also stops us from getting to the place where we can do something to at least relieve the pain that is associated with these events. So it's really a very important principle to understand. I do get that it can be very difficult to let go of resentment. It can be very difficult to forgive ourselves. And for many people, that is where the F word comes into play, forgiveness, which may be a very, very difficult concept. And again, if somebody else really hurt me, why should I forgive them? And a very important principle that I learned the hard way really in my own life was that forgiveness has nothing to do with the other person. Forgiveness is all about me. I get to the place where I give myself permission to work on letting go whatever may have happened to me in order to experience a sense of freedom for myself. It also implies that I will no longer allow myself to continue being punished for something that somebody else did. The same with remorse. If I can get to the place where I can forgive myself, I can let go, there is a huge amount of freedom that goes with that, a huge amount of relief and release. If I am not able to let go of resentment or remorse, I am really holding myself captive. I'm keeping myself imprisoned to something, as I said, that is no longer happening. And I will never be able to move forward. So the question would obviously be how can I go about letting go of my resentment, or for that matter, the remorse, the anger, the frustration that I feel towards myself. And in that process, how can I go about letting go of the past? This is something that shocked me a bit the first time I read it. I don't have the reference, unfortunately, as to who said this, so I'm quoting somebody else. For some people, holding on to pain signifies a badge of honor. It identifies them as one who has been victimized. And I remember this was very relevant to me. I don't normally share a lot about my personal life, but in this context, I think it could be helpful to somebody that may be listening to this who is finding it difficult to let go of things that have happened in the past. I come from what I refer to as an emotionally sterile home environment, very dysfunctional. We never experienced, well, I can only speak for myself, I never experienced any expression or demonstration of love, acceptance, validation. I also experienced childhood sexual molestation. I experienced running away from home at the age of 14 and spending some time on the streets. I experienced bullying and teasing at school. So I really felt very unaccepted. I felt rejected. I felt isolated most of my life. And the things that happened to me as a child, obviously I was not responsible for. And I was a victim to that. So growing up, I convinced myself that I couldn't let go of the past because everything was so unfair. Why did it happen to me? And then unconsciously, I would form relationships with people whom I hoped would make me feel better about myself, who needed to understand me, who needed to sympathize with me, and really who needed to feel sorry with me for me because I was a victim. So that really became my badge of honor. Look at me. I am wounded. I'm hurt. You need to make me feel better about myself. And I just continued to experience more and more rejection, more and more isolation because of that mentality that I had, because of that victimhood that I was stuck in. And it really served me at the time in the sense that I felt that it made me noticed. And although in reality it was really working against me, it kept me trapped. And as I said, even way into my adulthood, I remained stuck in that mindset. They wear the badge to mark their identity and as a means to justify their victimhood. Blame. It was my past that was to blame for who I was. It was my parents. It was my peers at school. It was life that was unfair to me. And that really, in hindsight, became my excuse for not taking personal responsibility, for not looking at what can I do. Now, personal responsibility, as I intimated earlier on, I may not be responsible for what happened to me, especially if it was during childhood. And sometimes even as an adult, there are times we may be we may not have much control over what is happening. We don't really have any control over other people's attitudes and behaviors. But what I learned, unfortunately, fairly late in life, but at least I learned the principle was the fact that those situations were in my life, the fact that I had experienced them now made them my responsibility. In other words, what am I going to do to bring about the change? What am I going to do to bring about healing? Because as I said earlier, as long as I blame, as long as I project, I will remain a victim, and I put people and situations in control of my life and my emotions. So how do I go about addressing that? Holding on to the past robs me of taking personal responsibility. I am not able even to get to the place where I can think, what can I do? And one of the reasons, being from a neurological point of view, is as long as I hold on to resentment, anger, bitterness, frustration, unforgiveness, whether it be towards somebody else, whether it be towards myself, that stress has a direct impact on my brain function, my cognitive function. It has a direct impact on my ability to think clearly. And the reason being that there is a constant release of stress hormones because I'm constantly stuck in negative thought patterns, negative ways of thinking, thoughts of pain and anger and victimhood. And that stops me from being able to think clearly. What can I do? How do I go about this? So I am not able to take personal responsibility, and therefore I am not able to exercise any personal power. I am not able to take back my life. And it was only once I started to really grasp this principle. Yes, what happened to me was unfortunate. I wish it never happened to me. I didn't have any control over that. I was supposed to be protected and looked after, and that didn't happen. But now as an adult, remaining a victim is a choice. Holding on to what happened to me is a choice. I just want to throw this into me. Somewhere along the line, somebody came to me and said, it's time that I forgive and forget. If I can respond to that in a semi-crude way, bullshit. There is no such thing as forgive and forget. That is denial. How do I forget a traumatic experience that happened to me? What I, however, discovered was when I started on my journey of healing and recovery and restoration was I could get to a place in my life where I could remember what happened to me, but I no longer felt the pain. I no longer felt the resentment. I no longer felt the remorse. I was no longer beating myself up. So there was that sense of freedom. So it's not that I forgot what happened to me, but almost in a sense, if I could put it this way, I forgot the pain that it used to bring up in me. And the reason for that is when I started to change my story, when I started to change my narrative, and we will look at how to go about it from a practical point of view. When I started to change my perspective on what happened to me, it started to change my emotional state, and it started to help me to tap into my personal power in order to find ways to address whatever it was that I felt stuck with and in for so many years. There is something that is referred to as significant emotional events. And what that implies is every single person on earth, I will go as far as saying, will go through negative, painful, difficult, challenging situations, circumstances, events in their lives. That is just part of life. Remember, we looked at the fact that pain is inevitable. We will go through those particular situations. And the word significant, meaning it is meaningful, it is very strong. And for some people, it could be significant emotional events that are painful. So for others, it may move on to traumatic experiences. So what makes the difference between a significant emotional event and a traumatic event? I just want to look at that quickly, and then I'll come back to how this relates to maybe our inability or / unwillingness to let go of the past. What signifies a significant emotional event that could develop into a traumatic event would be the intense emotions at the time of the event. And I want to use a practical example of a client that I had before, and I've got his permission to use the story. I obviously will not use his name. He came to me for some trauma coaching and counseling, and he remembered an experience when he was about 6, 7 years old. During that time, his parents were going through a very difficult patch in their marriage, and that in later life started to affect his relationships, and I'll explain why. So let's call him Peter. Had memories of intense negative emotions when he was 6, 7, 8, hearing his parents fighting and arguing. Intense feelings of fear because he didn't know what to expect. Intense feelings of sadness because he didn't feel safe. And it was really, really very, very strong, intense emotions that he experienced. In addition to that, he also experienced intense helplessness. It was something that was outside of his control, an intense feeling of betrayal. And what it simply means is what I thought was safe turned out not to be safe. That could also include dashed hopes, dashed expectations. In his case, the safety of my home turned out to be an unsafe place. There was that sense of betrayal. And by the way, these feelings and experiences very often is subconscious. There is not a conscious awareness of these processes. And this happens to every single person at some level at the time of a significant emotional event / trauma. Then there is the process of internalization. At some level, the individual internalizes some level of responsibility. There's something I should do to stop it, or I deserve it, or if only I had the woulda, coulda, shoulda syndrome, as we call it. And in his case, he internalized responsibility that he couldn't stop his parents, and maybe if he wasn't naughty, they wouldn't fight. And that internalization tends to stay with us when we grow up. And that also takes place, as I intimated earlier on, even at an adult level. If it is a situation that we may be experiencing as adults where there is an intense emotion, an intense feeling of helplessness, an intense feeling of betrayal, we do internalize some levels of responsibility. As a result, we are then inclined to form an unconscious belief or unconscious beliefs directly relating to the situation. In Peter's case, he developed beliefs about relationships because he was witnessing his parents' relationship falling apart and the pain that surrounded those events. And in our therapeutic session, he discovered that the belief he had developed was that relationships are painful. Relationships are difficult. And then the decision as the result of the belief, I will never get involved in relationships. And again, these are unconscious, subconscious processes. And if I could sort of touch a bit on depth psychology, this is really the subconscious mind's way of finding ways to protect Peter in future from experiencing similar situations, because the association has been made that relationships cause pain. So therefore, it is important that I stay away from relationships. But because this is all unconscious, Peter later in life started to pursue relationships, and he kept repeating a lot of the patterns that he had observed. Now, this applies, as I said, to some level for all of us. And maybe listening to this, for some of you, something may come up that you may recognize in whatever the significant emotional event may have been that you experienced, or you may even identify it as being traumatic. And as I said, it's the intensity of these various processes that makes an event traumatic. And as a result, we then tend to behave according to the beliefs and the decision. It could be self-sabotaging behavior, could be behaviors in which we act out in different coping mechanisms. For some people, maybe substance abuse, and some people maybe violence for that matter. And we then tend to create these cycles because we are not aware of what happens. And unconsciously, we then also form what is referred to as a comfort zone. This is what we know. Like for Peter, he remembered when things started to quieten down, settle down. His parents eventually got divorced, and They were able to maintain an amicable relationship after that. And he remembered, thinking about it now as an adult, how difficult it was for him to get used to the lack of arguing, the lack of fighting, because that is what he had become used to. That became his comfort zone. And by the way, my personal opinion, there's no such thing as a comfort zone, because I've never known that to ever be comfortable. A comfort zone should rather be called a familiar zone, when we remain stuck in patterns and in cycles because that is all we know, and it might even get to a place where we realize it is no longer serving us, but that's all we know. And that is one of the reasons why people may be inclined to hold on to the past, because it became their familiar zone. It became part of their identity, although cognitively, rationally, they may realize that it no longer serves them and it is important to let go. There is no point of reference what it's going to be like to step outside that familiar zone or the comfort zone and to experience something new. A very well-known family therapist that lived many years ago, Virginia Satir, made the statement that people would rather hold on to the pain of what they know than face the fear of what they don't know, or the fear of the unknown, or the uncertainty of the unknown. And that, again, is just part of the subconscious mind holding us to that which we are familiar with as a form of protection and safety. And as I said, that could be one of the number of reasons why we may be inclined to hold on to the past or find it difficult to let go. We can only create an experience through the meaning-making and feeling-making process. Again, another very important principle to grasp. As human beings, I think most of us, if not all of us, are inclined to say, what happened to me caused me pain. I'm here to say to you and to myself, that is unscientific. That is not how it works. From a neurological, psychological point of view, the brain does not work like that. My emotions are always the result of my thinking. In other words, mental processes going on inside of me in response to a situation. It refers you to the meaning-making and feeling-making process. So something happens. My best friend is very unkind to me and is very hurtful to me. In that split second, there is a story that is developing in my head about what my best friend is doing. That is the meaning-making process. There is a narrative that develops. I tell myself a story about what is happening. In response to that narrative, that story in my head, my nervous system responds to that bioelectrically and biochemically, and create my emotions as a result. And what I mean by that is, if my story is one of pain and disappointment and maybe insecurity, my nervous system will release an array of stress hormones, and the stress hormones being released into the bloodstream are the cause of my feelings of pain, sadness, frustration. The actual event that takes place is only about 10% of the process. The other 90% of the process is the meaning-making and the feeling-making process that takes place internally. That creates my experience. And I really, really want to labor this point. It's really important to grasp this. So my best friend did not hurt me. My best friend said something to me that I thought hurtful thoughts about, and as a result, I experienced the hurt. Now, my story may be 100% true. It may be 100% correct. We're not judging the story. We're simply explaining what the cause is of my experience. So it is the meaning that I give the situation. It always, always, always is the meaning that I give that situation. So there is my current story about what is happening, plus the memories that it may trigger from the past when I had similar experiences where I experienced similar negative emotions. That all becomes compounded. So my nervous system responds, and then I create the cycle. My negative story creates negative emotions. The negative emotions feed into my negative story, and I create this feedback loop. What does that imply? I create my own reality. And I remember again, the first time I heard this, there was something in me that said, bullshit. I did not cause my own pain because I was so conditioned from a young age to blame. I was so conditioned from a young age to project because of the negative experience that I had at a young age. It was very difficult for me to understand, yes, what happened, happened. We do not take any responsibility for the external situations. Why people did what they did, that is none of our business. That is not our responsibility. But my experience is my creation, well, 90% of it at least, that it was the meaning that I give it that created the feeling and that created my experience. Now, going back to holding on to the past, for some people, and for me it was definitely the case, it almost becomes an addiction because of the emotions that are evoked by the story about the past. And as I said, that maybe start to define us, it becomes familiar to us, and we keep repeating the cycle. And when I started to grasp the reason why I am still experiencing the pain of something that happened years ago was because I kept talking about what happened, and I kept repeating the same negative stories about what happened, and my nervous system or my subconscious mind, there is no understanding of past, present, future. It simply responds to my story. It responds to the meaning that I give the situation. So when I started to realize that I was continuously recreating the experiences by rehashing what happened to the past and holding on to what happened to the past, it was as if lights went on. And slowly I was able to start working on some of the processes to move towards a place where I was able to slowly give myself permission to let go of the past and the pain associated with those memories. What is the payoff for holding on to the past? And this is where some people get upset. How can you tell me there's a payoff or reward is causing me pain? Subconsciously, there's a payoff. And it may be because I'm getting attention. It may be because it gives me something to project my negative feelings onto. Therefore, it makes me, in a sense, almost feel better about myself, which is never really the case. So there is some kind of benefit, unconsciously so, that I am holding on to, that I'm experiencing, that I'm receiving, that causes me to hold on to the past. And as I said earlier on, also that familiarity, this is all I know. At an unconscious, subconscious level, I don't know what I will do if I don't experience this any longer. So another very important principle to understand, there is always a payoff for our behavior, otherwise we wouldn't be doing it. There is some kind of need at some level that we may be meeting, and it's important that maybe that we explore that to see what that reward is, what that need is that we may be meeting by holding on to the past. Everything is perfect as it is. Wow, how can you say that? You don't know what I've been through. You don't know the painful memories I have. I empathize with that because I've experienced a lot of pain in my own life. But all this means is what I am experiencing right now, the place that I'm at right now, cannot be any different. It cannot be any better. It is what it is. The word perfect does not imply that it's good. It just means it can't be any different. It can't be any better. And the reason for that is there is something called the law of cause and effect. And every situation that I'm experiencing is an effect, an outcome's a result of something that preceded it, something that caused it. And as long as that cause remains in place, the effect will remain in place. Now, holding on to the past for me, for most of my life, caused me intense emotional pain. So the cause was holding on to the past. The effects were loneliness, victimhood, emotional pain. It could not be any better. It could not be any different because I kept creating the same cause by holding on to the past. So if I'm not happy with what is perfect right now, and by the way, we're perfect in this context just implies the culmination of a process. Doesn't mean it's good necessarily. But if I can get to the place right now, it is what it is perfect as it is, it can't be any different than it is, it can't be any better than it is, because I did not realize that I kept perpetuating and creating the same causes over and over again. A universal law tells me that whatever I push against, I create and experience more of, because I'm feeding it energy. I'm feeding it more negative emotions, so I will experience more of it. So I need to go back to the cause. The cause is I've been holding on to things that no longer serve me. I've been holding on to resentment. I've been holding on to remorse. That is the cause. What I'm feeling and experiencing right now are the effects. So until I find a way to create a new cause, and always starting with how can I think differently about what happened in the past? How can I change the story about what happened in the past? I'm not able to change what I am experiencing currently. And just something I want to throw in, how can I go about creating new causes would be to reframe the story. Going back to my best friend who was unkind to me, who insulted me, who disappointed me after everything we'd been through together, and I thought he was my friend, and how could he do it to me? And that narrative, that story left me sad, left me depressed, left me hopeless. And when I understood this principle, I could revisit and reframe the story. My best friend said something to me that caused me emotional pain because I told myself a painful story. Immediately there is a sense of relief, because when I reframe that story and making it more factual, more clinical, immediately there is a reduction in the release of stress hormones, and I feel less overwhelmed. And when I feel less overwhelmed, I am more able to think and look rationally about the situation. And then I can start to ask the questions, what can I do to go about it? So how do I go about it? Reframe the story and make it as short, as clinical, as factual as I can. And then whatever processes we're going to look at in a few minutes, I can add to that. Focus on the present moment. While I'm looking at the past, as I said earlier on, I'm focusing at something that is not happening anymore. And that was also one of those principles that used to irritate me when my counselor told me, focus on the present moment. But what that means is, when I was asked these questions, my counselor said to me, John, as you are sitting on this chair at this moment in time, what is happening to you that is causing you pain? And I had to think hard, and I couldn't come up with something. I desperately wanted to come up with something to blame at that moment in time. No, nothing is happening to me right now, this moment in time, as I'm sitting on this chair or lying on this couch, that is causing me pain. So why am I experiencing the pain? Because I'm going into the past, talking about things that happened, or I'm going into the future, talking about concerns about things that may happen. Right now, in this present moment, there is nothing causing me pain. The second thing he said to me, as you are sitting on the chair right now, is there anything that you did not survive in your life? And again, I desperately thought, what can I use to confirm or to support my victim mentality? And no, if I didn't survive, I wouldn't be here. So I was able to survive, maybe came through it wounded and hurt, but I survived every single situation that I ever faced in my life. And this present moment brings that to my attention. And if I can focus on this present moment, again, it reduces the stress, it brings a sense of calmness, and it helps me to refocus and look for possible solutions to address whatever the situation is that I may be facing. The acceptance process. Acceptance, when I can give what is permission to be, because it is perfect as it is. It can't be any different. It can't be any better. It is what it is. And I'm going to go through this quickly. I do have a video on YouTube where I talk about acceptance. So if you do a search for TTK Life Strategies on YouTube, TTK Life Strategies, you can watch this video, and it's a very, very powerful video where I explain these various processes, but I'm just going to go through them quickly simply for the sake of time. So initially, I feel resistance. In other words, I feel resentment, I feel anger, I feel frustration. And it's important that I acknowledge what it is that I'm feeling because of whatever may have happened in the past. I then move on to tolerance. I'm willing to tolerate it. I'll white knuckle it because I know I am moving towards a place of acceptance where I'm able to let go. I may then move into a place of apathy where I'm just exhausted. I'm so tired. I don't want to do this anymore, or I feel I can't do this anymore. Now, for some people, that may be risky. They may want to give up. This is not about giving up. This is simply giving in. So I realize I've been fighting this. I've been complaining about it. I've been holding on to it. It has caused me more pain sometimes than when it actually happened to me. I'm going to work towards this place of forgiveness. And I realize I'm so exhausted. And when I get to the place of acknowledging the exhaustion, I'm then able to surrender. And simply surrendering is whatever I've got in my hand that I've been holding on to, I open my hand and I let it go. I surrender, I let it go. Simply letting it go. Where is the situation? I'm not in denial saying there is no situation. The situation is still there, the memory is still there, but I'm not experiencing the intense pain anymore. I let go. Then I can get to the place of acceptance, and the place of acceptance where I can start to experience peace. Because if I get to this place of acceptance, there is a release of stress. And I know I've said this before, and I'm probably still say it a few times. Acceptance is simply, I give what is permission to be because I know it is the outcomes of whatever happened before. It is the effect of a cause. And I can start to work now at creating new causes that will create new effects. And once I get to this place of acceptance, I may then move on to the place of embracing, where I can look for some of the lessons that I could learn from what happened to me. What can I take out of this experience to take with me? What lessons can I learn from this? And this is where people tend to say, if it wasn't for that situation, I wouldn't be where I am today. And the ultimate place where I can then get to is to celebrate what happened. And that is when people say the best thing that ever happened to me was that, because it really helped me to learn more about myself. It really helped me to learn to put healthier boundaries in place. Because very often while we experience pain inflicted on us by others is because of our lack of boundaries. And again, another promotion here, I also have a very informative video on boundaries on YouTube as well. Again, if you look for TTK Life Strategies on YouTube, there is a video on the importance of boundaries. So we can see the benefits of working through this process. And what we're really looking at is the steps or stages that I go through to get to the place where I can give myself permission to let go of the past. Simply by acknowledging what happened. I experience pain. I do not take any responsibility for what happened to me, but I do take responsibility for where I am right now. What can I do about it? Realize your feelings are valid. You're not being melodramatic. You're not being a victim by acknowledging the feelings. I really experienced a lot of hurt by what happened. Physically let out the negative emotions peacefully. Find a way to express it, write it, talk about it. If it's a lot of anger, maybe punch a bag or something, but look for what you can do to give a voice to the feelings. Accept that it is time to let go of the past. You have got to this place now where it is okay to let go. Identify what is keeping you from moving forward. And as we looked at, maybe it's a badge of honor. Maybe I get sympathy from it. Maybe I get attention. Maybe I don't have to take personal responsibility. And then decide to forgive. Forgiveness, the ability to let go of what happened, the ability to no longer allow myself to experience the pain of something that somebody else did to me. And then number 6, identify what it is that you want.
I want you to know right now that anybody who's ever reached a high level, whether it's in art, dancing, singing, sports, business, relationships, or even spirituality, has had a major obstacle that they had to overcome. You cannot change the past. What you can do, however, is give your very best in this moment for a better future. You have to understand, something that no longer exists cannot truly harm you in this present moment. It is only the meaning you give it in your own thoughts that actually hurts you. If you don't want your past to hold you back any longer, stop giving it energy, stop giving it focus and attention, because that's what makes it grow, that's what gives it power over you. It's whatever you give the most amount of your attention that you'll get more of. So if you keep thinking about the pain and the problems and everything you've been through, well then you're gonna keep experiencing it. It's just a surefire way to make yourself into a victim of life. Don't let it control you any longer. Cut the chains. Make a commitment. Decide. What is it that you need to do? What's your purpose? What's your calling? Because at the end of this lifetime, you can either be in miserable regret or in deep fulfillment of having done what you were supposed to do. You only get one chance at life, and I challenge you to live with that in mind. Death is the best reminder, the best alarm clock, the best notification. What if you only had one day left? How would you feel about what you've done, what you've accomplished? Are you really going to allow your past to keep you in the passenger seat of your life? Instead of letting what happened before get in the way, let it fuel you and push you further this time. Convert the pain to passion. Let it drive you. You are alive right now. Today is an opportunity. Today is the day to change it all. To look back to this day in a few years and say, that's when I finally committed. That's the day I began my life's real journey. You are alive right now. Because there's no greater shame than not trying. There's no greater shame than not giving it your all. If you've gone through it all and you're still here, alive, breathing, that means you've got some work left to do.